Hello and welcome to another episode of Cybeers. Today I am joined by four of the team here at Triskel Labs. First of all, we've got Thomas. Welcome, Thomas.
Hey everyone, glad to be here.
You've not joined us here at Cybeers before, it's your first time?
No, first time. It's been an interesting start. Running a little late, but we'll get there.
We'll get there. Jason Trapp, first episode of Cybeers as well. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
As always, it seems like we're also here with Jack Rutherford. Welcome, Jack.
Good evening.
And we've got Richard Granger. Sans beard, Rich. You've gone with the moustache from November.
That's right. Unfortunately, chopped off the beard for November, but it's been worthwhile. It's for a good cause. So yeah, it's worked out.
Look, and if you are watching this, obviously we're doing November. Jason and Rich don't just grow moustaches for the fun of it, even though they look fantastic sporting their mows. If you do feel like donating and you've got the capability to do so, I would very much appreciate it. We will include the link to donate. All goes to a very worthy cause, especially with Rich shaving off the biker beard and going for the moustache. So very much appreciated of going to that effort. As always, we're here to review our beers. Unfortunately, there's going to be some very, very big disappointments for those who are watching. I've got a very basic pale ale this afternoon. I've got the One Love pale ale from Brick Lane. It's brewed here in Victoria. It's one of my favourite pale ales. It's been a very long week. We all work in cybersecurity, so it was time for a pale ale. Very much enjoy it. It's coming into summer. If you haven't had a Brick Lane One Love pale ale before, very much recommended. Thomas, what have you got?
I've got a Pirate Life Brewing South Coast Pale Ale. Hails from Port Adelaide, just like the football team. It's quite.
We won't talk about how good or bad Port Adelaide are.
They're not as good as this beer. It's pretty tasty. Good for summer's day. It's finally heating up a little bit here, so.
Yeah, today's 20 degrees and sunny, but I don't think any of us actually got out. So we were meant to go for a burger at lunchtime, but Deepak took the centre stage. All right, Jason Trapp, what have you got up in sunny Queensland?
Well, I've got two beers. So the first one is a Pacific Ale from Four Pines Brewing.
How is it, honestly? I know you had some comments before this. How is it?
To be fair, I'm not really much of a drinker, but I'm not a fan.
So you've got your secondary, you've got your backup.
The second is Burley Twisted Palm Tropic Pale Ale. Pretty sure this is brewed locally on the Gold Coast. Yeah, it is. And it's about the same as the.
So if you're a non-beer drinker, don't drink either of those two beers. Jack, what are you on today, mate?
Today, I've got a Capital Brewing Company Hang Loose Juice.
Oh,
Fun fact about the Capital Brewing Company, based in Canberra. Obviously, had to go local. I've just read that they're the first Australian certified brewery to be carbon neutral. So there you go.
Wow.
A little fun fact, as well as producing my favourite beers, without question.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Anytime I come down to see, well, down across up front, if you ever remember which way Canberra goes from Melbourne, anytime there we do enjoy a few of the capitals. And Rich, to buck the trend, how's your gin going down today?
Pretty good. So today I'm having the Larican Gin Cherry Gin. Hopefully we can align it so you can actually see it.
Oh, there we go.
Sort of. Yeah. So this is made in Ballarat, actually, and probably one of my favorite gins from them. It's pretty good. Got it paired with a light tonic because it is a bit on the sweeter side, so you don't want to get too much of a sugar overload on it. But yeah, highly recommend.
Yeah. Anyone who's watching, we know it's got Cybeers, but Rich has his own gin Bible that he's been featured in. So we'll share the link for that as well. He's very much a gin man. So cheers, guys. But first of all, before we start to get into it, so enjoy your beers.
Cheers.
Cheers.
While we're doing that today, we have decided we're going to break down a breach. So we've got a fair bit of knowledge in the room across the digital forensics and incident response team. We've got Thomas, who's responded to incidents before. Really, there's a lot going on in the Australian sector at the moment, which we're not going to give any airtime. To the breaches themselves, there's a lot of information out there. If you do want to talk specific about any of them, just reach out. We're more than happy to have a conversation. But really, we wanted today to break down what it's like and how threat actors get access to a network. Everyone just thinks that ransomware is just, that's all it is. Someone, threat actor, unauthorized user gets onto a system, encrypts systems, launches malware onto them and runs away. That's not necessarily true. So we thought we'd get together and talk what that actually looks like and how threat actors even get access to a network in the first place. They don't just get invited in. It's not just here, come and ransom my network. There's a fair bit that goes on to it. So team, I'll hand over to you. How do threat actors and these unauthorized users actually find these organizations they're going to go after, and then how do they actually get in?
Well, stage one, right? Initial access. We'll probably break it down today into the several different stages of an attack chain, particularly the important ones where a major difference is made and there are different tools that can be involved. We'll talk about the different tools that are involved at each step and the different techniques that are being utilized. But before you get into the network, you have to worry about how to get into the network. This is what we call initial access. So, Rich, what are some of the most common methods of initial access that we've been seeing this year?
Yeah, I guess from a initial access perspective, we're seeing a lot of exploitation of vulnerabilities on external facing servers or applications and things like that. So probably the biggest one we've seen is proxy shells. So that's where an organization is running a on-premise Microsoft Exchange server that is vulnerable to several CVEs that were identified in August last year. And if you're able to exploit those, you're able to get remote code execution on that server as system. So basically the highest level of privilege. That's a big one. We've also had a number of...
Rich, before we move on, on-prem Exchange, bad.
Yes.
Is that what
yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations have it because they've got some legacy thing that, like one mailbox or something legacy that's running on that on-prem server, and not using it a lot, not necessarily aware that it's still there, needs to be patched. So pretty much all the organizations that we've had engagements with where proxy shells was that initial access, they've all since decommissioned that and they've moved completely to Microsoft 365 Online Exchange. That takes the onus off of them to have to maintain and manage that software.
But there's some organizations, right, that we're seeing that's still running a full on-prem Exchange environment. So it's not just that hybrid approach. They're still haven't gone to 365.
And it's like, I feel like it's organizations that feel like, they've paid for that license. They're not, willing to move to that subscription model. They'd be like, we paid a lot of money for our Exchange license, and, they bought Outlook and Microsoft Office outright. And so, they feel financially motivated to not make the switch.
Yeah, and M365 is not cheap.
It's not.
A lot of organizations will look at it and say, well, why should we move? And one of those big things is this vulnerability that we're seeing. And if you do make that move, we're always taught as cybersecurity professionals, don't have something in your network that is externally facing. Exchange has to be externally facing. It has to sit in your network. If you can transfer that risk to be someone else's and they can manage that for you, that's a much better solution. So
that's exactly correct.
Get rid of Exchange. But when you do make that shift, it takes an opportunity to implement new controls, turn on multi-factor authentication across the board. It will save you.
And having Office 365 in the cloud makes that so much easier to implement these controls across the whole board. And I mean, these are the reasons why you should move, even if it is a bit more expensive. But I mean, 50% of the initial access vectors we saw into client networks this year were because of vulnerabilities externally exposed, right? Part of that was Exchange. There were several others involved. The ACSC annual threat report that just came out, one of the key trends outlined in this report was that threat actors are becoming faster and faster at weaponizing the exploitation of publicly disclosed vulnerabilities. Sometimes within 24 to 48 hours, threat actor groups have weaponized these exploits such that they can distribute them widely, target as many organizations as possible, to ransomware as many networks as possible, and exfiltrate data as quickly as possible to make as much money as possible.
And that's the goal, right? Hit as many organizations as they can.
Yeah.
It's a numbers game. Eventually someone will pay.
Yeah, and like Jack said, there's some scary stats out there about how quickly after these vulnerabilities, get disclosed and a proof of concept exploit, gets uploaded to GitHub or another code repository. They're seeing threat actors going and scanning the network, and there are these tools available like Shodan and the likes that you can just scan constantly over the pretty much the vast majority of the World Wide Web, and you can go search for outdated Exchange servers. It's incredibly easy and incredibly accessible, and the skill levels, it's not a high bar of entry.
And Jason, that's what they're doing, isn't it? They're going into tools like Shodan. They're scanning as many systems as they can to find these vulnerabilities they've got exploits for. They might not necessarily be targeting anyone. They're literally just finding the vulnerability and hitting it.
Yeah, exactly. Like with Shodan, you can search for if they're using specific tools. So like, for instance, if they're using like a FortiGate firewall or a DRATEC router, or if they have something else. Well, there was a recent vulnerability exposing DRATEC to the remote code execution for DRATEC.
Absolutely.
I mean, I hate to reference the ACSC report again, but 150,000 to 200,000 small business to home routers currently vulnerable within Australia. DRATEC being one of the brands, indeed.
All right,
Yeah.
so that's Proxy Show. What else are we saying, Rich? There's a bit of a list that we've got that we see from top.
I mean, in terms of, we probably won't go into much more detail about it, but Log4j, that's still a thing.
It is.
We're
Drink.
seeing.
We mentioned Log4j. Drink.
Yeah.
You almost can.
Particularly with outdated VMware Horizon servers, that's something that we're still seeing. And to touch on the point before about how easy it is to weaponize these vulnerabilities, exploiting them is consistently across all the Log4j VMware Horizon incidents we've had. There's been evidence of crypto mining starting late December, early January, that's when Log4j became a thing, and everyone became aware of it. We're seeing a lot of exposed remote desktop protocol.
Just don't do it, right? Just don't expose RDPs.
Putting it behind a VPN to secure it is a big step that you can take if it's required in the environment, and good old phishing as well. So delivering a malicious file or a link to a malicious file through an email, and then the user executes it, and that what gives that initial access to the threat actor.
Or just collecting credentials through phishing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To try on an exposed RDP gateway. We've seen that as well.
Or a VPN without multi-factor authentication.
Or on a VPN, yeah. Or
even one of my favorite things when we're doing red team engagements is to get into someone's SharePoint. There is always passwords stored in SharePoint. There's always domain admin passwords stored in SharePoint. You've seen an interesting one recently.
Yeah, there was passwords stored on notepads or sticky notes, except they thought it was okay because it was the software version of sticky notes, not the actual physical one, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, so move to a password safe. It's pretty simple. Rich, you mentioned something pretty interesting then. This initial access, you said there was a lot of it going on around December, January. And Jack, I'm again going to reference the ACSC annual threat report. That graph it's really interesting that you watch it and you can see when the initial access has been, or the ransomwares. Why do we see so many attacks happen around that December, January timeframe?
It certainly was a spike, yes. And, bit of speculation as to why this might be the case. But for any of the Eastern European countries, for example, their break tends to be in the middle of our winter. So we tend to see a bit of a lull during that period. But then when we go on break over Christmas, they're generally working hard. I mean, even Asian countries as well. There's a lot of other areas of the world that are still very active during these times, right? And arguably, threat actors may even keep exploits in the back pocket and not widely exploit them until these times, because they know there are less people in Western countries working and responding, and less people there that will actually be available to stop these attacks from happening.
Nobody's watching, right? There's been a number of occurrences that we've seen that initial access on Christmas Day, and they've kept that initial access, and we've done the investigation several months later, and we've looked and they've gotten the initial access Christmas Day, and they just work through systematically. They work through their list and they hit that organization. They've still got their initial access. They hit that organization. They just keep on working down the list.
Do you think that's part of people, access brokers obtaining access to systems and then selling it, to different threat actors? So, there's a large dwell time between, say, someone exploiting the vulnerability, getting in and putting in backdoors, and then they take that and then sell the access, which may take a couple of months.
Yeah, look, I believe so. It's common to see a non-sophisticated threat actor get that initial access. They don't know what to really do with it. They get the access, they do some crypto mining, then they look and go, okay, well, I don't really want to take the data. I don't know what to do with it once I've got the data. I don't know how to launch ransomware. So yes, I'm gonna on-sell that access, which is that access broker. And I guess, Rich, that's the next part we see, isn't it? It's not just the exploited vulnerabilities; it is that initial access broker.
Yeah, there's been a number of investigations where we've identified that initial exploitation that let them into the environment, and then there may, in some, quite common with Proxy Show, was creating a new local administrator account on the server, and we could see, obviously, through the event logs whenever that was logged into, and there would be times where they would log in, you have a bit of a sniff around, get an understanding of what's happening on this box, and then nothing for weeks, and then all of a sudden someone else comes in, and 5 days later they've got a ransomware incident.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So that's a lot about initial access. But how about when the threat actor... Indeed, that's step one, but it is an important step. And it seems that after this step, it actually becomes quite easy. So after initial access...
This is the thing. It does. It's so simple. A lot of the things we're seeing, they're not sophisticated.
Well, this is the case, right? Organizations tend to spend their time and focus on the outer perimeter, and then on the internal, it's usually soft and squishy. So a few of the first things that a threat actor needs to do once they've actually gained access to a network. They need to perform situational awareness. They need to look around. So they probably need to do some kind of internal network scanning. They also like to try to move laterally, see what they have access to, and escalate privileges. So any insights from the team onto some of the techniques being used for these stages of an attack?
Yeah, so during a lot of incidents I observe, a lot of the time they use NetScan or NS. It's a free tool. And it's like a Swiss Army knife of network scanning that comes with so many features and tools. Like you can scan for certain ports, or you can try use username and passwords, so you can just try brute force that for SMB shares or anything like that.
They'll spend possibly weeks, sometimes months, of knowing your network better than you will. They'll know what systems are vulnerable. They'll know where the data is. They'll get a full understanding of the network, where the sensitive data is. We've seen occasions where the threat actor will look at annual profit reports They'll find banking details. They'll log into bank accounts. They'll find your insurance policy. They'll know what you're covered for from the insurance perspective. So when they launch the ransom, they know exactly what to ask for. We've seen an occasion, Rich, where they were on one of the compromised machines and they went to Dun & Bradstreet and looked up the profit of the company, of the compromised company, on that machine on Dun & Bradstreet.
But they got in and then they're like, I have no idea where I am. They did a bit of digging, read some of the internal documents on the machine and go, all right, I have no idea who this Australian company is. Let's do some research, find out how much they're worth. So when I ransom them, how much can I potentially charge for that?
Yeah.
And left in the browser history.
Yeah, it's in the browser history.
One example where they run like a quite a small script and they search, for keywords for those, sort of profits and everything like that. And this particular actor, they knew the company so well that they, after encrypting the servers, deleting the backups and everything, the only desktop that they actually crypto locked was the CEO's and left the ransom note on it.
Wow.
So that's how well they knew the company.
Yeah.
They know everything. They, as I say, they know your network better than you do.
So look, it's often common that once they've spent a bit of time with the network and have performed this situational awareness, it's not too hard for them to find a method to escalate their privileges, or perhaps they're already a local administrator, domain admin, depending on the permissions or access controls that exist internally. I think a really important topic here is what are some of the tools they're using for command and control? Richard.
So Cobalt Strike is obviously a very popular
The Swiss Army knife of
offensive tools. That's right.
We've certainly seen a lot more GUI-based tools as well recently, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, RDP is still very common. We'll see threat actors utilize that to move laterally within the network once they've got that the credentials to do so.
But even alternatives, right? Like AnyDesk is an example. TeamViewer,
Yes,
I've seen a few times.
RMM tools as well. AnyDesk, I think we've seen that quite a bit. Splashtop as well, Matera. It's because they are legitimate tools. They're often utilized by a lot of MSPs. So when something goes wrong on a user's machine, they can just spin it up and access it. But you can also get free trials, and that's allows threat actors to deploy those tools, and potentially that gets missed because it's not a inherently malicious program. It just could be used maliciously.
Yeah,
That's right.
and that's the thing. Even if you're looking for it, you've got the best monitoring in place. You've got a SOC. You're not going to find those legitimate tools because you look at them; they're legitimate. Especially if the threat actors manage to compromise an administrator account or system or one of the domain admins. You would just assume that that's a legitimate tool. Then once they've got that, they'll then go and put things in scheduled tasks. For instance, that's something that we see quite regularly, isn't it? That they'll go and set up scheduled tasks to continually run their malware.
Indeed. I think another really important technique being utilized that we're seeing a lot of these companies do actually have antivirus, right? Now, there's a very clear discrepancy to be spoken about when we talk about antivirus versus next-gen AV and endpoint detection and response. Very different things with very different capabilities. Antivirus will block your common malware. A lot of the time it will pick up and block Cobalt Strike. Unfortunately, there are quite easy ways around this. So perhaps it's important to talk about some of the ways they're disabling antivirus in all of these networks.
Yeah, I found that some organizations just use Windows Defender for their antivirus solution, and you can just disable that as easily as getting Defender control, and that just turns it off in the registry.
Popular tool. Absolutely.
It's really easy to use. Like, it's just a click of a button.
Another GUI-based tool.
Exactly.
Yep.
I think another really prominent technique that we've witnessed as well is the use of legitimate signed antivirus drivers from one company to disable antivirus programs of another company. Rich, do you have any more information on those?
Yeah, we see that quite a lot where we've got legitimate binaries, signed drivers for a particular antivirus, and it's just popping up on all these endpoints that have had their own antivirus disabled as well. So it essentially allows the threat actors to completely disable that antivirus, and that's kind of one of their goals as well, especially when they're looking at deploying ransomware. They don't want anything to interfere with that, but even other tools that they want to use, like Mimikatz or something like that, they want to be able to run that without it being blocked.
So
And that's what I was going to bring up next.
companies shouldn't be using legacy-based antivirus, is what I'm hearing, and they should be using EDR solutions. Look, we're not the first ones to say this. We won't be the last. The ACSC released their media release, their statement to say in February, all organisations must implement a heightened level of cybersecurity controls. And on about release number 9, they did come out and say deploy an EDR, deploy a SIEM, test your incident response plan, and have cyber insurance. So we're not the first, and we won't be the last.
Yeah, and it's really important about the monitoring too. You can have the most advanced EDR in the world, but if they're left to be, unmonitored in there, and they eventually get the main administrator and the likes, eventually it might be very difficult for them. Then even the most advanced solutions can be disabled and switched off. So monitoring is such a key part of it.
We've seen occasions of that, haven't we, guys, where the endpoint security software, whether it be EDR or antivirus, has picked these things up, just no one's looking at it.
Yeah, there's been a number of occasions where the client has had an EDR tool, good EDR tools in their environment, and the problem is that the alerts are firing at 2 p.m. Eastern time, 2 a.m. Eastern time, and no one is looking at it. They've been ransomed a month later, and we've gone into their EDR solution and seen those alerts, and it's useful and helpful for us to understand what happened on those machines back then. But because they didn't identify that this happened and this was an issue, they couldn't take actions that would have ultimately prevented the ransomware from occurring. Like, why is this account logging in at 2 a.m.? Why are they running tools to try and disable Windows Defender? Let's change their password. Let's look at our exposure of RDP and things like that.
Why is NetScan being run in my environment at any point in time?
Yes.
Why is an RMM tool that we don't use being executed? And this is the thing, a lot of organizations do have a number of these controls in place. They just need to be monitored. People need to actually be looking at them. They're not set and forget tools by any means.
How effective do you think application whitelisting is to preventing these attacks? Like, I know that some very advanced threat actors, can live off the land, as they say. They use inbuilt tools which are sort of already installed and hard to
Go back and see one of our other Cybeers on living off the land.
hard to protect against. But I kind of feel like application whitelisting is a very strong protection. I don't really see it that often.
We don't see it because it puts such an administrative overhead. If you don't have the people to continually monitor it, look after it, approve new applications, then it becomes difficult. Rich, Jason, are we seeing it as an effective control that just adds a lot of administrative overhead, or is it not that effective?
There's a lot of administrative overhead because, like, at my last workplace, we had application whitelisting, and it was just horrible for forensics. Like, if you want to run a tool, then you'd have to do it through a VM. Like, even just for basic things through PowerShell, you couldn't do that. It's not the be-all and end-all, but security is like a mixture of different layers. So defense in depth is heavily encouraged, but never seen.
Yeah, I agree. Like with Jason, like it's just one tool in the tool belt that can be used. There are occasions where application whitelisting would have stopped the threat actor, but I mean that's not to say that they wouldn't have just figured out a way to work around that and continue on their mission anyway.
And that comes back to your favourite topic of defence in depth and layers of controls that I know you're consistently speaking about that Jason just mentioned, and helping organisations understand that once one layer fails, you need to have another one in place to defend and, again, have a resilient and robust network.
Yep, that's right. The 3 pillars of security: people, process, and technology is what we're all always pushing. You need layers in every area there, but you also need layers at every point throughout this attack cycle that we're talking about, right? At the initial access, obviously, at the perimeter of your network, but also to prevent each of these stages moving forward. The next of which, as a good segue, would be the collection of sensitive information, the discovery of where the crown jewels are within a network generally, and the subsequent exfiltration of this. So what are some of the things we're kind of seeing, team? Perhaps where sensitive data is being stored, insecure practices of that nature, and how threat actors are managing to get hundreds of gigabytes, if not more, of data out of a network.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of, well, for instance, like they map file shares to every computer pretty much. If it's accessible to every computer, it's easy for a threat actor to gain access to this data. They'll usually have like
So
a
what,
H drive.
don't make the file share accessible from the Exchange server?
Nah. I mean, you can, but there's a risk to it. It's just all part of the risk register.
You need a risk register.
So you choose to accept that risk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So segregation. So we're seeing them move around and understand the data, and then grabbing that and putting it in staging, right?
Yeah, so it depends on the threat actor. They're more often than not, we see them get a bit of understanding of where important information resides for the organization. And like Jason said, a lot of the time that's on a file server. So it might have HR documents, which might have information about your employees, might have driver's licenses, passports, if there's just travel involved with your employees. And then on some instances, we see them compress that data just to make it a bit easier to exfiltrate. And in terms of exfiltration, there's a number of ways they do it. Probably one of the most recent ones that we've had is with FileZilla, which leaves some interesting artifacts that Jason can attest to, like the most recent servers that they've connected to, which may or may not leave IP addresses for certain countries in there. But there are also threat actors that are developing their own tools to get this data out of networks. Things like Steelbit, which was developed by the Lockbit ransomware group as well.
It isn't like I'm still seeing sort of investigations into some threat actor groups now where they're not even really bothering with the ransomware. They're almost just taking the data, and they realize that that's pretty much the most effective leverage because, people might restore from backups or maybe they don't, but it's really the data that's allowing them to get paid.
Look, we're seeing that sometimes. Most of the time, if the threat actor can get data and they can delete backups and launch the ransomware, you've got 100% business interruption, they get paid. If it's just the data and you don't really mind the data that's been compromised, you will let it be published. Most organizations we just need to operate. So the end goal, the optimal for a ransomware group is take the data, delete the backups, delete the backups, delete everything. So offline immutable backups, absolutely key. As we've mentioned through this already, backing up to NAS drives, not a good idea. We're consistently seeing NAS drives being accessed and deleted. Inaccessible, offline, completely backups that can't be changed or deleted is key, because then they'll launch the ransomware. And if they've deleted all of the backups, you've got no choice but to pay. So.
Yeah, but even with stealing the data, even if they do or don't want the data published, then the threat actor can just sell it on dark web forums for extra cash. There's always a method or an avenue for recourse or getting paid out for that.
So then they've got the data, they've put it out via FileZilla, they've deleted the backups, or they've put it out via one of the threat actors tools. Then what's the final stage that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, this is the point in which they need to execute the ransomware, right? There's lots of different variants of ransomware that we see here, generally recognizable by the different file extensions that they add to encrypted files. A few interesting points in that sometimes for efficiency, not all files are encrypted, just have a file name changed. Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes the encryption mechanisms are insecure. This is a good opportunity to probably shout out the website nomoreransom.com, which details all the weak ransomware variants where keys are available. Unfortunately, most groups are sophisticated enough to prevent this, so we don't see this very often, but it's worth mentioning nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so then final stage, you find a note on your desktop detailing where to pay the money and jet to the threat actor.
And then run around,
That's
the room's on fire and my network's been ransomed and my data's gone.
That's right.
And then this comes back into what we've suggested in plenty of our other Cybeers before, that if you find your network's ransomed, please don't try and run various tools. Pick up the phone if you have cyber insurance, call your cyber insurer. If you've got a DEFA company on call the DEFA company, but just leave everything as is. Don't turn things off. Don't try and run tools. Just call the experts.
It's already been done.
Yeah, it's been handled. So the insurance companies all have the experts on call, and we need as much as we can get. So removing evidence doesn't make our life any easier.
You'll get back online faster with more evidence.
Absolutely. Our job is to get you back online faster. And look, we're not going to go in and debate the morality of paying a ransom today, or whether you do or you don't. We've done Cybeers on these before and talked about paying ransoms. But look, at the end of the day, it is an organisational choice whether to pay the ransom or not. The DEFA team always is here just to guide through. There's never any judgment held. We've worked with organisations that pay. We've worked with organisations that don't. It really is an individual choice.
But it pays to be prepared, right? Making sure you have incident response playbooks in place, making sure you conduct war games and exercises so that you can understand the kind of pressure and the decisions that need to be made in these scenarios should it ever happen to you.
Well, and the ability then, and the really hard part is when you come up against a sanctioned threat actor group, that even if there is a payment to be facilitated, they may be on a sanctions list. You may not be able to actually facilitate that payment. So at the end of the day, prevention is still better than relying on cyber insurance and paying that ransom.
Absolutely.
There is a possibility as well that you pay the ransom and you won't get the keys back. So, the keys for the decryption. So preventative is still the best measure.
Yeah, and like with ransomware incidents, everyone is very focused on that impact of that ransomware binary being executed on machines and encrypting it. Yeah. But that doesn't just happen. There's always steps that lead up to that happening, and there, more often than not, there's always opportunities to detect and prevent those steps from taking place, which should prevent the actual ransomware from being executed.
That again, that defense in depth that we're talking about, have the layers of controls to stop the breach as far left as possible towards that initial access. A breach should be stopped. Controls should be in place to stop an unauthorized unauthorized user gaining access at that initial access step, not waiting to the endpoint and then stopping them there. They've already been through the network.
You know, it's like there's only a limited amount of groups that will, go to, these really, they'll try really hard to get these hard to hit targets. Most of them just after low hanging fruit. It's
opportunistic.
It's a numbers game. They're not going to spend months and months and months trying to battle through the, EDRs and SIEMs and everything like that. Once they get in there, they might get access somehow and they sort of see it. Maybe they'll move on to another one. So
So don't make yourself a target.
It's about being out of that. Yeah, be out of that bottom 60%.
Yeah.
You know,
So have
it has to be perfect.
Have MFA to prevent phishing. Hatch externally facing systems.
Yeah.
And don't have insecure protocols.
Yeah.
They're the three big things that we're seeing from an initial access perspective.
Scan your external IPs. See what it responds with.
Attack surface management.
Knowing what your footprint is it's very important.
Key.
Now companies you turn up to and say, oh, you've got an FTP server hanging out, or it's like, oh, I can see your database server. And I'm like, no, you can't. I'm like, yes, you can. It's kind of concerning.
There's no silver bullet to security. It's all mixture of defense and depth. Like, even if someone does get in and you want to protect your data, make sure you have something like data loss prevention in place. I believe SharePoint offers that feature.
They do through specific Microsoft 365 licensing, but we won't go down the 365 licensing rabbit hole. I've been there all week. I want to get out.
You could spend a month in there.
Yeah, a week was already enough torture. All right, team, we've broken down a breach. Is there any other pertinent information? Is there any other nuggets of wisdom that we've got?
I think, just reiterating on your point, don't be scared to reach out for help. You know, if you're finding in these situations, you know, not even insurance or deeper companies, the cybersecurity center, you know, there's heaps of resources. Australia's got pretty good resources available, government, both state and federal. They're here to help. They're not here to throw anyone under a bus. Like you said, no one's here to judge. And it really sucks when you're in it. So
it sucks when you're in it, but you've got the support for when you need it. Okay.
Start your security roadmap journey today. Make sure you have a long-term plan. Make sure you're continuously improving and stay ahead of the curve.
Don't wait.
You don't want to be low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, don't wait until the new financial year, because that's when budgets get unlocked. The threat actors don't care that it's the 1st of July. So
That's right. Nor do they care if it's Saturday or Sunday.
No, they love Saturdays and Sundays. All right. Thank you for joining us and sitting through us breaking down a breach. We hope you've learned something. And until next time, cheers.
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 Team.
Cheers.